Hospitals are full of noise, footsteps, beeping machines, whispered worries. But sometimes, in between the chaos, there are quiet corners where stories unfold slowly, like paper soaked in sunlight. Room 12B wasn't special. Fluorescent lights, pale blue curtains, a window that looked out on nothing but the roof below. But that's where she spent her last days. Mrs. Ishida. Small, silent, always folding paper. No one really noticed her. The nurses said she never spoke, just nodded when asked about meals or medicine. And every morning, there'd be another crane. Neat, precise, resting on the windowsill like a secret. It wasn't until after she was gone that Mia, a newly hired nurse, found the shoebox. Tucked beneath the hospital bed, taped closed, marked only with a red ink circle. Inside were dozens, maybe hundreds, of paper cranes. Each one carefully folded, each wing creased with care. And inside the first crane she opened, Mia found a message written in elegant faded script. For the memory I never got to speak aloud. That was the moment the story began. Not with a heartbeat monitor or a final breath, but with silence, with paper, and the sound of unfolding wings. Mia had only been at the hospital for 3 weeks. Just long enough to memorize the halls, to know which vending machine gave the best coffee, and to understand that grief had many disguises. But room 12B, it felt different from the others. Mrs. Ishida had passed away quietly 2 nights before. No family had come. No visitors had been listed in her file. It was as if her life had folded inward the way her cranes did, gently, with precision, then placed aside. Mia had been the one assigned to clear the room. She didn't expect to feel anything. But when she bent down and found the shoebox taped beneath the bed, something made her pause. The box was light, but it felt full of something heavier than paper. She opened it at the end of her shift. The staff room was empty, and the night lights hummed with that late-hour quiet. One by one, she unfolded the cranes. Some were blank. Some had words, tiny messages handwritten in black or red ink. I never meant to leave so soon. He liked his tea with too much sugar. Does memory live on if no one shares it? Each crane was a whisper from a life lived in shadows. Each message peeled back a layer of a woman no one had truly known. Mia found herself folding the cranes again after reading them. She didn't know why, maybe out of respect, or maybe because part of her wanted to keep the mystery intact. But by the 6th crane, she knew this was no ordinary box. It wasn't a keepsake. It was a map. And something inside her told her to follow it. The next morning, Mia returned to room 12B before her shift began. The bed had already been stripped, the nameplate removed. Nothing lingered, except the faint smell of lavender and the outline of a paper crane's shadow still etched in the dust on the windowsill. She brought the box with her. She hadn't told anyone about it, not yet. Part of her felt like she was trespassing on something sacred. But another part, a deeper one, knew this story wasn't finished. Inside the box, tucked under a small white crane, she found something new. A folded sheet of music, yellowed with age. At the top, in delicate cursive, were the words, Kiyomi's Song, October 1949. Mia traced the faded ink with her finger. The melody was simple, sad, almost like a lullaby. She showed it to the hospital's music therapist, who raised an eyebrow. this is pre-war notation," he murmured. "Where did you get this?" Mia hesitated. "It belonged to a patient," she said quietly. "Mrs. Ishida." She folded paper cranes and left them behind. He studied the sheet again, then gently handed it back. "This wasn't just a song," he said. "It was a message. Someone named Kiyomi mattered." That night, Mia searched Mrs. Ishida's file again. No family contacts. No emergency numbers. Just a birthplace, Hiroshima, and a single note scrawled in the margin of a very old intake form. "Daughter lost, never spoken of again." Mia felt something tighten in her chest. The cranes weren't just memories. They were grief folded in silence. Words that had nowhere else to go. She picked up another crane. This one was red, and inside it read, "She liked to hum before falling asleep." And suddenly, Mia knew. She wasn't holding stories. She was holding someone's unfinished goodbye. Mia spent her break in the hospital's quietest corner, the unused family consultation room down the east hallway. She spread the cranes out across the table like puzzle pieces, looking for patterns. Some had only single sentences. Others carried phrases in Japanese, which she scribbled down to translate later. She couldn't explain why, but the deeper she went, the more she felt like she knew Mrs. Ishida. Not just as a patient, but as a woman with a voice that had been kept in a quiet, folded place for far too long. She unfolded a cream-colored crane and read, "The fire took everything but the sound of her laugh." Mia stared at the words, her fingers trembling. Was it metaphorical? Or had there really been a fire? Another crane, sky blue, contained a small pressed flower and the words, "She put daisies in her shoes before the recital." These weren't journal entries. They were snapshots, memory fragments preserved like tissue in bone. Mia folded them again gently. She began documenting each crane, photographing them, creating a spreadsheet. It felt like detective work, but it didn't feel intrusive. It felt right. That evening, Mia sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by papers. Her laptop was open to genealogy websites and translation tools. The name Kiyomi returned no matches. But Mia typed it again and again, searching obituaries, school records, anything. The final crane she opened that night had no message inside. Just a music note drawn in black ink. A single eighth note. But beneath the flap, scrawled so lightly it nearly vanished, were 4 faint words. "Please don't forget her." Mia held the crane in both hands, whispering into the silence of her apartment. "I won't." The hospital moved forward, as hospitals do. New patients came. Beds turned over. The name Ishida faded from the charts. But in Mia's world, she was more present than ever. One afternoon, after her shift, Mia took a risk. She visited the archives, a dusty, basement-level room lined with metal cabinets that hadn't been opened in years. She'd convinced the clerk that she was doing personal research on geriatric memory care. That wasn't a lie, not entirely. She searched old patient forms until her fingers ached. And then, near the bottom of a faded manila folder, she found it. A photograph. Black and white. Cracked at the edges. It showed a young girl, maybe 5, on a stage with a small piano behind her. Beside her stood a woman in a kimono, smiling softly, her hands resting protectively on the girl's shoulders. On the back was written, Kiyomi, Spring Recital, 1951. Mia stared at the photo. It was real. This wasn't imagined grief. It was a life lived and lost. A mother, a daughter, a silence too long endured. She scanned the photo and added it to her growing file. The pieces were forming a picture, not just of tragedy, but of love that had no place to go. Back in her apartment that evening, Mia unfolded a crane she hadn't dared touch until now. It was smaller than the others. Folded from a hospital bill, the ink barely legible. Inside, only this. Her shoes were too big, but she danced anyway. And Mia cried. Not for herself, and not just for Mrs. Ishida, but for every unspoken memory that dies unheard. For every voice that folded itself into silence. The next day, Mia arrived early to work, carrying a small glass jar filled with paper cranes. Not Mrs. Ishida's, but her own. She had begun folding them late at night, the motions becoming both a habit and a prayer. Each crane she folded carried a memory from her own life. Simple things, her mother humming while brushing her hair, the smell of her childhood garden, her father's old watch ticking beside her bed. She placed the jar on the windowsill in room 12B, now occupied by a man recovering from surgery. He smiled at her, asked what they were. Wishes, she told him. Memories. And for the first time in a while, she saw understanding in someone's eyes. During her lunch break, Mia returned to her notes. The crane messages were starting to connect. They hinted at a life of music, motherhood, loss, and displacement. She even traced one message to a long-closed school for girls in Kyoto, another to a fire reported in the 1950s, where dozens of families lost their homes. Mia didn't find a death certificate for Kiyomi. That absence spoke louder than any confirmation. In her gut, she knew something happened, and Mrs. Ishida carried it like a second heartbeat. She never stopped loving her daughter. She just ran out of ways to say it. That night, Mia placed the very first crane back in the shoebox. The one with the line, "For the memory I never got to speak aloud." She whispered to the box. "You've been heard now." And with careful hands, she folded a new crane of her own. Inside it, she wrote, "Your silence became a song." A week later, Mia sat at the edge of a small community event hosted in the hospital's atrium. The theme was Legacy Through Art, and someone had suggested she share her cranes. She hadn't planned to speak. But when the microphone was offered, her fingers brushed the folded paper in her pocket, and she stepped forward. She told them about Mrs. Ishida, about the silence, about the cranes. She didn't go into every detail. Some things were meant to stay sacred, but she spoke of a woman who remembered through folding, who poured a lifetime of love into shapes the world had forgotten how to see. People listened. Some cried. And when she finished, they folded cranes of their own. Clumsy ones, slanted wings, torn edges, but each one held meaning. Mia placed them all in a new jar beside the old one in room 12B, a growing archive of memory, of stories folded with care. Months passed. Life returned to its routines. But Mia carried the shoebox with her whenever she moved departments. It sat in her locker beneath her extra scrubs, waiting like a quiet companion. Sometimes, when she needed grounding, she would open it and read one of the messages. One of her favorites was written on the smallest crane of all. She danced like the world had forgiven her. And every time she read those words, she imagined Kiyomi spinning barefoot in a quiet living room, daisies in her shoes, her mother smiling nearby. In the end, Mia didn't need to find all the answers. Some stories don't need solving, just listening, just honoring. And so the cranes remained, not as a mystery, but as a monument. A testament to love, silence, and the words that still find a way to reach us, even when spoken on folded wings.
In the quiet of a sterile room, she folded stars from faded bloom, each corner bent with memory's hand, a story told in grains of sand. The world forgot her daughter's name, but every crane still held the flame of lullabies and whispered grace, a love that time could not erase. Let the silence sing, let the paper fly, let the cranes remember what we can't deny. Even in the dark, even when we part, a folded wing still holds the heart. Box beneath a stranger's bed, with words she never really said, now open wide, now breathed anew, by someone who just wanted truth. Let the silence sing, let the paper fly, let the cranes remember what we can't deny. Even in the dark, even when we part, a folded wing still holds the heart. She danced like the world had forgiven her, and I heard the song in the whispering blur. No name on stone, no final goodbye, just cranes in the wind, learning to fly. Let the silence sing, let the paper fly, let the cranes remember what we can't deny. Even in the dark, even when we part, a folded wing